Blake Leath. Welcome to the Gratitude Series, Episode 8. Today's episode concludes a tiny trilogy within the larger Gratitude Series, Episodes 6 and 7 having dealt with patience and perseverance, respectively. Today our focus is personal discipline, self-discipline. I'm of the opinion that patience, perseverance, and personal discipline are simply three parts of one logical whole, their common denominator being self-control. Self-control in the face of tremendous adversity. And, in the case of the girl who loved to write, Anne Frank, as honored in Episode 6 about patience, and the boy who loved to run, Terry Fox, whom we'll meet momentarily, not just adversity, but even death. Last time, in Episode 7, we considered Viktor Frankl's perseverance at the absolute zenith of Nazi fanaticism and hate of all others, Jews being enemy number one in Hitler's eyes. And I promised you that Terry's final years and his death would prove to be an object lesson exemplifying the very best of Viktor's hard-won, beautiful beliefs, the sharpest of which he learned firsthand at the pointy end of bayonets in god-awful conditions for 946 consecutive days, that he then wrote about in one tiny book that sold 16 million copies in 25 languages under 4 titles. A psychologist experiences the concentration camp. Nevertheless, say yes to life. From death camp to existentialism. And, how most of us know it today, man's search for meaning. Viktor's beliefs, or more accurately, his findings, include these 2 gems. First, that meaning and discovering one's purpose in life is the primary existential crisis, the itch to be scratched, the math problem to be solved, the motivator, the mover, and the driving force in the experience of being human. And second, that this intrinsic pursuit can both trump and transcend our baser instincts, drives, internal urges, and external state, including power and pleasure, and can even empower or propel us to endure more pain than we might have otherwise thought possible. Frankl's notion of tragic optimism suggests that we all experience the unavoidable, the tragic triad of guilt, death, and suffering as an inevitability in the experience of life. We can believe and behave optimistically, though, nevertheless, and while we may rarely experience a peaceful inner equilibrium, much less a persistent one, Frankl's tools equip us in varying yet robust ways to reconcile our daily internal tensions, be they regret, worry, fear, insecurity, overwhelm, or any of the other myriad distressing emotional vagaries that combine to churn within us and then lead us to inner conflict, emotional turmoil, and external fight and flight responses associated with such anxieties, and even behavioral paralysis, as in our freeze response. Frankl hypothesized, and his life demonstrated, that we as people can choose our values, be they creative or experiential, and that these values facilitate shifts in our dispositions and in our attitudes. He described existential frustration as nothing more than misdirected meaning, that when we feel unfulfilled in life, or aimless, or empty, or hopeless, it's often because we are living accidentally, haphazardly, disconnectedly, and not on purpose. And should we try and fill the void that exists within each of us with transient, temporal, superficial things, trappings, be they materialism or addictions or depravities and the like, then we are doomed to eke out existences of quiet desperation at the very least, and violence at our worst. But that most of us, the majority, if you will, lays about atop the hump of a bell curve, simply going through the motions like Jim Carrey's Truman in The Truman Show, or like a bunch of zeros and ones in The Matrix, never discovering, much less taking, the red pill revealing pursuit and passion and purpose. The red pill, by the way, is not tax-free, nor does it come without some nasty side effects, because it demands that we takers face our personal issues head on to reconcile and resolve our internal tensions. And truth can be a very hard pill to swallow indeed. But truth is the only way forward, up, and out of the realm of ruts and replays. And, according to those who make it through to the other side, the believers I'd call them, the exalted purposefulness awaiting us on the other side is more than worth whatever strains or struggles we must embrace to exit the here and now. Now, for those of you who live in chronic pain, be it physical or psychological, I trust you'll hear what I say and know what I mean when I acknowledge that pain is the great prioritizer. Because to live interminably in a state of moderate to high to very high pain forces one's hand, necessitates choosing, and often becomes more stimulating than the opposite of pain, pleasure. If your pain is so great that it is debilitating, that is one thing. But if it is merely difficult, and no worse than that, then maybe think of it in terms that are constructive in your life, not destructive, as an accelerant or agent for change, a catalyst for prioritization, a cleaver that trims the fat from life, the excess, the unnecessary, that lops off time poorly spent, or selfishly so, or that could otherwise be directed at pursuits that are more benevolent, or lasting, or eternal. Too many of us, I fear, go through life in a fog, or treat life like chewing gum, a distraction that is meaningless, worthless, passing, and which dries up in a matter of moments only to be discarded, replaced, and repeated, unless or until it becomes something sticky or hard, necessitating resolution. When life is, in fact, precious and priceless. And if pain does nothing else, it separates the wheat from the chaff on our Thanksgiving table. So maybe think of it in these terms, in terms of prioritization and possibility, rather than paralytically. Pleasure, on the other hand, keeps us warm and cozy, sedative and vegetative on the couch of life, clicker in hand, controlling fascinating or faraway images that flicker before our eyes while we, ourselves, get nowhere. But pain, I find, especially when it's great enough, is not so passive or patient a friend. Because, by definition, pain is a fiend. Pain is a needy and greedy SOB. And it doesn't just want some of you, it wants all of you. Plus those around you, plus your memories, plus your unlived future. So beware. Don't hesitate to raise your hand. Don't suffer in silence. If you struggle with chronic physical, psychological, relational, or spiritual pain, you are not alone. Say you need help and seek it. I find it fascinating that among the many critters capable of walking bipedally, we are the only one, a predator no less, with all our vital organs facing forward, all the time, in the most vulnerable place possible, up front. I feel this is no accident. It's intentional. It's like we are designed to put our hearts out there, to be willing to live vulnerably, and to trust others. Everyone we come in contact with is similarly vulnerable. There is no denying the fact that our spine comes from behind. In the end, it turns out that Viktor Frankl's suggestions are elegantly simple, but intellectual simplicity does not always translate to behavioral ease. Because if it did, we would all be in love and in great shape. Romance and self-help being the top 2 best-selling book categories in the United States year after year. It would similarly follow that we would all be somewhat more generous and virtuous than we are, given that 5 billion copies of the Bible have been produced since its commitment to paper. So keep in mind, as you lean into change, personal growth, and the pursuit of leading a meaningful life on purpose, that Frankl never said change would be easy. On the contrary, he said change is difficult because pleasure is an anesthetic, a numbing agent, and pain is something most people avoid until it becomes untenable, debilitating, or crippling. And until such time, most of us try to reason with it, placate it somehow, negotiate with it, forestall it, push it out to the margins, until such time, of course, that pain decides we're being stingy or holding out, at which point it loves to ratchet tight or screw down. And then we'll see who's boss, won't we? Then we'll know who's in charge. Yeah, progress is a tough proposition. Running through hellfire to upend one's status quo in pursuit of living a purpose-driven life is not exactly something most of us take on lightly. And way too many of us opt to coexist with the devil we know, rather than put ourselves out there, to run the hazards, to risk failing by charging unwittingly and without any degree of certainty or success whatsoever, face first into a gauntlet that, as far as we know, could lead to Valhalla or Shangri-La or Utopia or perhaps to absolutely nothing, to nowhere, to a mirage, or worse, a meat grinder. Morality, Froude wrote, when vigorously alive, sees farther than intellect. And I agree with that supposition. So I'll take the bet every day of the week that striving to live a meaningful, purposeful, connected, contributory life, despite falling short or outright failing more often than succeeding, is nevertheless worth attempting. Granted, the futility of that, or my naivete in leaping without knowing, or in living by faith alone, might be frowned upon in this increasingly glossy, vapid, superficial, matrixy world we've constructed for ourselves. But I'm convinced, now more than ever, that living in belief rather than disbelief is not only right, but will also be rewarded and eventually redeemed. I also believe that fallible and fallen as they are, just like the rest of us, Anne Frank and Viktor Frankl led with love and heart, as championed in Episode 1 and as evidenced in the life of my dear friend, Dalton Jansen. And they both lived with optimism and joy, as celebrated in Episode 3. And though they were each dealt hands of hate by their captors, somehow, miraculously, they each traded mostly in peace. Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 and 14, tell us that wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. That being the case, it would seem that the upside of adopting a herd mentality and going with the worldly flow is that we don't have to worry about leading much, thinking critically, or making tough choices that risk making us unpopular or easy targets. But the downside is that when our herd is found, we'll be together all right, but upside down at the bottom of the canyon just this side of the cliff. So instead of going along to get along, avoiding ruffling feathers, taking our lead from influencers encouraging us to pursue our bliss, waiting for some epiphanic breakthrough of clarity, or lightning to strike revealing our reason for being, I think it's both wiser and more expedient to just roll up our sleeves and start contributing already in some meaningful, tangible, actionable ways out there. Because Frankl's lifetime of research reveals that purpose more frequently comes on the other side of, after movement. That once we dig in and get going, purposeful living will likely follow. Because it ensues more reliably than pursues. To that end, and to demonstrate the point, we've all heard how busy the one-armed paper hanger is. But now it is finally time to shake hands with a real-life, genuine, one-legged ass-kicker, a Canadian teenager who literally ran farther on one leg than Tom Hanks ever pretended to on two in Forrest Gump. So, without any further ado, let's meet the guy already. Here are the factoids about Terry Fox, our brave boy at hand, and why I'm so thankful for his example of what it is to live with personal discipline, self-discipline, and like the Energizer Bunny, to just keep going and going and going. At 18 years old, Terry's right leg is amputated 6 inches above the knee. He undergoes 16 months of chemotherapy, during which he meets other cancer patients, many of them younger than he is. And with the encouragement of his high school basketball coach, he decides to run some 5,000 miles westward across Canada in the hope of raising $1 for every person in Canada to increase cancer awareness and research. He rightfully calls his journey the Marathon of Hope. That's exactly what it is. Because not only is it a gamble on a cancer-free future he'll likely never see firsthand, but also because there's no assurance that his broken body can even carry him that far west. Nevertheless, the kid says yes to life. Has a couple t-shirts printed. Rounds up a buddy to trail behind him in a van with a bed in the back. And step swings into infamy. But on September 1st, 1980, he's forced to stop his 5,000-mile run after it's discovered that bone cancer has now spread to his lungs. He'll die 10 months later, but not before realizing his dream of raising that $1 for every Canadian. He raises a little more than $24 million. He has literally run himself to death so that others might live. Others he'll never meet. Having averaged 23 miles a day for 143 consecutive days, he completes 3,339 miles. For half a year, he runs a marathon a day. He refused others' offers along the way to complete the run in his stead, stating that he wanted to finish what he started, to complete the marathon himself. The annual Terry Fox Run, first held in 1981, has grown to involve millions of participants in more than 60 countries and is now the world's largest one-day fundraiser for cancer research. In the 41 years since Terry's death, the Terry Fox Foundation has raised approximately $20 million a year, now totaling $850 million. This money has been used to produce better treatments for many different types of cancers. Let me tell you what I love about Terry. Pain being that great prioritizer. I would have expected, fully understood, had Terry chosen to hang around home and hearth. But no. He committed himself to doing that which was just about the most painful physical activity imaginable. Running from dawn till dusk on the heavy, awkward, primitive prosthetic of the day. One made of fiberglass and steel and leather. And there are countless photos of him, some snapped at the ends of those incredibly long days, just as he's climbing into the back of a van to sleep, where he can be seen washing dried blood from his leg with a water bottle. Sometimes we are too complacent, too distracted, too busy, too tired to accomplish things of significance, lasting things, things that matter, are meaningful, compel action, or social change. Yet when looking at the world through a fox-shaped lens, I can't help but believe that what I view as essential, Terry would view as optional. And what I view as optional, he saw as essential. Terry's behavior, like Anne's language, and Victor's beliefs, remind me to focus, to perform in the here and the now, to take whatever comes my way, one step at a time, yeah, but step after step, after step, after step, after step, until soon enough, I've either taken that hill on the horizon in front of me or died trying. But I guess that reminds me of Yoda. Do or do not. There is no try. Do it. Just do it. Terry spit out pellets of wisdom faster than a freaking Pez dispenser. But here are 10 of my favorite Foxisms that illuminate the belief system powering this kid's tenacity. Today, we got up at 4 a.m. As usual, it was tough. I have to really concentrate to ignore the pain and keep going. Sometimes I'm actually crying while I'm running, but I just don't think about it. The pain was there, but the pain didn't matter. Nobody's ever going to call me a quitter. I've seen people in so much pain. The little bit of pain I'm going through is nothing. They can't shut it off. And I can't shut down every time I feel a little sore. Somewhere, the hurting must stop. I guess that one of the most important things I've learned is that nothing is completely bad, even cancer. It has made me a better person. It has given me courage and a sense of purpose I never had before. But you don't have to do like I did. Wait until you lose a leg or get some awful disease before you take time to find out what kind of stuff you're really made of. You can start now. Anybody can. How many people ever get a chance to do something they really believe in? If I died, I would die happy because I was doing what I wanted to do. How many people could say that? I want to set an example that will never be forgotten. It took cancer to realize that being self-centered is not the way to live. The answer is to try and help others. And finally, I remember promising myself that should I live, I would prove myself deserving of life. Thank you for listening to Terry's story. Having now reflected on Anne Frank's patience in episode 6 Viktor Frankl's perseverance in episode 7, and Terry's personal discipline in this, episode 8. Our tiny trilogy, revolving around self-control, is at its end. We'll return to our usual programming next time, in episode 9. As Anne observed, first, we make our choices. Then, our choices make us. I do hope you'll choose to return. And in the meantime, I hope Anne's writing, Victor's reading, and Terry's running encourage you as much as they encourage me. Remember, reaching great means you're barely halfway there, because if we're fortunate, grateful is where we hope to arrive in the end. See you on the road.